Go as far as you can see. When you get there, you'll be able to see further. And that was Thomas Carlyle. Hopefully you'll find this talk more interesting than he appears to be finding things. So we're talking about blockchain, case studies in food supply chain visibility. This is based on a paper by Michael Rogerson and Glenn Parry, Blockchain Case Studies in Supply Chain Visibility, published in Supply Chain Management, an international journal. So blockchain's finding application in food supply chain. Visibility of exchanges in supply chains helps create trust. Blockchain provides a source of verification of when and where exchanges occur, but challenges remain in the system as they're not perfect. So this is the agenda of what I'll be talking about. The traceability and visibility, why is it important in supply chains? I'll be talking about what is blockchain and how can it help. I'll go through our research methodology, then I'll present 4 case studies from the food supply chains. I'll take you through some key learnings and look at some next steps. Supply chain visibility is the use of data to understand what is happening. So it's sort of an advanced form of traceability. So visibility is the firm's ability to access data that allows them to see into their supply chains. So research in supply chains employs 3 different characterizations of visibility, which focus on exchanges or sharing. It might focus on the properties of the data. Is it accurate, trusted, timely? Or researchers focused on the ability for information to drive action. Now, it's this last characterization of visibility that I think is most important, because that is really about sensing what's going on and providing data that allows you to respond. Traditional supply chains have been struggling with supply chain visibility. Often supply chains are led by very large firms who like to centralize control, and this creates information asymmetry with one player holding all the data. It's problematic because it favors large organizations or even the IT systems implementers. We see often that whoever wrote the system has done it to their advantage, and this prevents optimization of supply chain inefficiency. We see large firms holding data which really, if they'd shared it with smaller firms, it would have allowed them to prepare, to deliver on time. All these extra benefits could have been gained. Supply chain visibility implementation is difficult because it does require the whole supply chain to collaborate. Suppliers are often competitors with each other, and data may be used to drive down prices with your competitors if you knew, for instance, that they had lots of excess capacity or they weren't getting their sales through and you had visibility of that. So let's go back to our agenda. What is blockchain and how can it help in this sort of systems? You can consider blockchain as a list that is difficult to change. Now, blockchain is actually the specific Bitcoin variant of a distributed ledger technology, a DLT. It's, however, blockchains become the generic term for a distributed ledger technology. Numerous different blockchains exist. You don't have to create your own or store the data yourself. You can try any of the different blockchains out there. The Bitcoin blockchain itself was 242 gigabytes. That's how long the chain was at the end of September 2019. So it's getting quite a hefty bit of software to store. You can do it all via the cloud. Now, the data that's held in the blocks can theoretically be anything. You could have transaction for coins in the case of Bitcoin. You could put location, time, dates. You could have hashes, which are cryptographic shortcuts of other files, all sorts of things, data you could put in the blocks. However, there is usually a limit to how much data goes in a block. You need to choose your blockchain accordingly. Different sorts of blockchains have different limits on data sizes. In Bitcoin it's officially limited to 2 meg, but block size in Bitcoin is incredibly contentious, and you can read all about all the various forks and segwits and things and the arguments around block size. So current supply chain uses are few, as most publications are describing conceptual applications. So some concepts we found, around traceability of fine wine. There's $15 billion worth of fraud in that region, that industry every year. Pharmaceutical counterfeits, fake drugs, 200 billion market per year. But it's not all high value. We also find high volume. There's a Ghanaian tilapia fish, a white fish that's often missold, and they're looking at, can we look at catching the fish, registering that catch, putting it on a blockchain so people can say, yes, this is I'm buying the fish and it's the fish that I think I'm buying. Some actual studies where blockchain's being implemented. Walmart has a big pilot study with IBM using their Hyperledger Fabric. They're looking at tracking mangoes and pork, and this is sort of farm to table, so from where it's produced to actually delivering it to the final consumer. There's also a nice example on ownership of digital art. That's a fully digital supply chain. So who owns a digital piece of art? Well, the ownership is logged onto the blockchain. There's a reverse search engine in the system that constantly scans the internet looking for a match to that picture. And if they find a match, then an automated system can contact the website owner and say, look, the image you're showing is mine. And then depending on what the owner said, we can automatically send a letter saying, please cease using it, or please pay me to use it, or maybe just you can continue to use it, but I'd like you to acknowledge or put an attribution or a reference to me on it. So blockchain would appear to offer a solution to a demand for greater supply chain visibility. Customers and businesses are increasingly socially aware. They demand to know how, when and where products are sourced and processes. There are concerns about forced labour, child labour, modern slavery. Blockchain can help, but there's limited evidence of live cases of blockchain for supply chain visibility. Much research and application has been done in the financial technologies business, but we also see quite a lot coming through in the context of food and agriculture. So this leads us to our research questions for this paper. How are firms using blockchain for supply chain visibility in the food industry? We chose the food industry as our context, and what are the challenges? So let's look at our research methodology. So case study, because we had how, why type questions. Firms initially identified through our contacts were asked, and we then also did snowballing by people we spoke to said, well, who else should we speak to? Initially we contacted 73 firms, from which we got 42 responses. We got to interview 15 firms. 9 of those firms proceeded to second interview, and we finally ended up with 4 case studies from the food industry. So, the reasons we lost firms, some firms were concerned about sharing data, so they withdrew. Others didn't actually have blockchain. They only claimed to be using blockchain. It turned out to be complete vaporware. They weren't using blockchain, but they were claiming it for marketing reasons, so they seemed more technologically advanced. So having identified 4 final cases who were really using blockchain and were prepared to talk to us, we used semi-structured interviews to collect our primary data. Then we used obviously websites and other documentation that the firm provided us with secondary data. Having conducted the interview, the notes were read by 4 researchers, coded independently before comparison to identify common themes and show that these themes were valid and reproducible, because we'd got 4 different people agreeing that yeah, this was what we saw in the data. So case studies of blockchain applied in food supply chains. We've got 4 cases: AgriDigital, Techrock, World Wildlife Fund and TraSeable Solutions, and Demeter. AgriDigital provides verification of organic status. It's an Australian agricultural commodity management platform provider. The system offers assurance of the veracity of organic status for products. So farmers collect a range of data on a web application. which might include stages of growing, the seed, the fertilizer, the weather. Then producers might give you the milling location, what other cereals are being milled there. We might get transport information such as the times, the locations. Then we have RFID enabled weigh bridges that track vehicles and contents. So there's an awful lot of analysis visibility following the product all the time, showing where it is. The data is matched to expected and predefined practice, so creating claims for organic status named assertions. So if you're saying this is grown here and there's no fertilizer, etc., we can check that directly against the data. These assertions are hashed and recorded on a layer of a private quorum blockchain. So at the point of packaging, data is scrutinized to determine a claim for organic status. So when we come to packet that cereal, we can then look at where's it come from, who grew it, what are the claims against it, what are the assertions, and are they true. Only then will you be allowed to say, yes, this is truly organic. So what are the issues AgriDigital identified? Well, the system they've built does have human input, and therefore it is open to a small amount of error or corruption. That remains a challenge. One of the other challenges they said was, will people believe the data even though it might have been false upon entry? Blockchain seems to bring with it a halo of truth, which leads to a lack of questioning of the data, said one of their managers. So they're very well aware of the problem of this halo of truth around digital. And they also said technology cannot fulfill its potential unless supply chains are fully digitized beforehand. It's quite difficult to impose this technology after the supply chain's been developed, because new products and processes really should be developed simultaneously with the technology. Then it can really be embedded and make it much more difficult for people to tamper with our data. It's also very difficult to apply this in small networks. If you're looking at cereals, they tend to be fairly large numbers of people, large farms, large supply chains with many different nodes, because you get volume of data. If you've got 2 or 3 points on the supply chain, that's quite difficult to provide veracity, because really you've got just 1 or 2 points of failure, not enough nodes to have a secure system. So Techrock is our second case. They provide baby food provenance, and they provide this through anti-counterfeit assurance, and here we can see an image of a baby food can. Products are protected by smart packaging, so that's actually a RFID tag on the top of the can. So it's also got a QR code on top of that, so that can be read by numerous different machines. Customers can also scan with their smartphone the QR tag, and that will bring up a picture of what their can should look like, and it could give them all the information about where that can's been, because obviously that smart tag is on it. If you try and open the can, the smart tag is broken. That means that it prevents tampering. You've got confidence in the provenance of this product because it hasn't been messed with. So some of the issues that Techrock identified is, well, they said, look, this has been designed for infant formula and it works for food supplements and vitamins, but it is actually quite costly. That little tag is just that little bit more expensive. Parents are willing to pay the higher price premium for assurance over their baby's food. As a parent, you'll pay that extra. It's more difficult for some of the cheaper products that they might like to try and put it on. Also, they said in some markets there's been previous over-promises around technology protecting products. That makes communicating benefit and charging a price premium difficult to achieve when there's a degree of skepticism from the consumer. So this is our third case, the World Wildlife Fund and TraSeable, which is about sustainable fish management. So this system aims to tackle the problem of illegal fishing of tuna in Western and Central Pacific. So what do? Well, they allow their customers to collect details on catch. So they have the location, crew details and catch logs, fishing ground data, and all of that is captured on a smartphone app. Now that's further verified using satellite tracking on the ships, and that's data's logged in parallel. During the processing, when they catch things, the shipments are tagged with QR codes, and that data is then recorded into the web application, which gives you all the information about where was it processed, what were the storage conditions, what were the temperatures. Data are automatically documented on the firm's public Ethereum blockchain, and data is shared via QR codes, and that allows third parties to process. Say you're trying to ship it or you need a permit application, you could just scan the QR code, you get the necessary data. And also end consumers can look at, is this sustainably caught, where was it caught, and they can get access to all the supply chain data. Some of the issues, well, they said the Pacific's a very big place and some areas just don't have the digital infrastructure and hardware, so you're reliant then on human data entry that's open to fraud. South Asian fisheries have thousands of vessels delivering to hundreds of ports and processing facilities with with very little monitoring, so really you need everybody to employ this to try and close down the opportunities for corruption across those many thousands of processing areas. Another issue, blockchain lacks adequate data and input standards. There's, across different blockchains, there's not really a common standard. That creates governance issues. It makes communication and learning transfer between different blockchain trials quite difficult. And they did say that, within electronic data interchange, just establishing standards took over 30 years, so they're not too hopeful that this will be standardized quickly. So this is our final case. It's Demeter, supply chain visibility for fine wine. This is a pseudonym, but it is Demeter's not their real name, but they didn't want us to reveal who they were. But it's an EU-based blockchain system applied to fine wine in partnership with the wine producer. So they use a modular reusable label with an RFID tag is scanned at each node to provide traceability and visibility. Data capture includes growing conditions, wine grape variety, the handlers of the wine, its journey from vineyard to store. There's actually something else embedded in the cork, which means you can't take it out. All this data is stored on a public Ethereum blockchain. So a combination of factors enhance trust and security in this network. So to prevent collusion, to prevent people tampering with the data, if there are two people in the transaction, there's got to be a third party owning the data on their system. And they also do something called mass balance, where they look at the total transaction volume that was possible from a number of grapes, and if they then see more bottles than grapes were sold, then we know that there's an imbalance, and they call that the zero knowledge truth, because they don't need to reveal how much grapes and how many transactions. All they need to be able to show is these two things aren't balancing, therefore this isn't right. So consumers' smartphones can then scan the QR code on the bottle, and an app gives a product data set and a color-coded response whether this is a bottle of the authentic wine that you think it is. So these are some of the issues that Demeter identified. The first one was they said that there's some negative media around blockchain due to cryptocurrency fraud that's been going on, so people have become a little wary of blockchain. Ironically, this is an issue of trust with blockchain, and blockchain was originally presented as the trust machine. Now, there's a deal of secrecy surrounding blockchain applications and trials. You've seen that with our own research, where we found, we started off with 72 firms and we managed to get 4. This means it's quite difficult to share learning and best practice, which is potentially slowing the rollout of the technology across different businesses. It also makes people wonder why information is being kept from them. There's also a problem with evangelists who think that all data needs to be stored on the blockchain. They said, it's unnecessary, it's expensive, it's time consuming. Only the critical sensitive data needs to go on the blockchain. Anything else could be stored locally or shared. you've really got to consider what are you putting into that blockchain and why. So what's the key learning? So blockchain provides unit level supply chain data that is valuable. So our cases show unit level analysis and tracking provides visibility and data sufficient to initiate and inform action. So Demeter data facilitates import-export, providing data for duty and taxation at ports on where the wine's moving between countries. AgriDigital helps consumers decide to buy organic products, TraSeable to buy sustainably, Demeter that the wine is a counterfeit, and Techrock that the product is safe to give to a baby. So research supports theory that supply chain visibility can create greater profitability by providing this more consumer-centric offer. This unit level data helps firms make product recalls in the event of contamination and simultaneously makes such events less likely because they've got good visibility of this supply chain. So supply chain visibility using blockchain systems really does help in decision making both for consumers and suppliers. Supply chain visibility using blockchain to create trust in products and processes. Consumers and audit demands, evidence of product provenance are driving these implementations, and our cases demonstrate systems of assurance regarding the product supply chain. All 4 cases utilize blockchain to provide transparency and trustworthy data to members of the supply chain. It may help reduce potential labour abuses where systems capture location, people and equipment abuses are more difficult to conceal where this sort of insight is provided. It's particularly in the TraSeable where you're linking the catch, the boat and maybe the crew to the location. Fraud then becomes more risky for the individuals. Now blockchain holds process data which is used as evidence of process veracity, showing what really went on, and this is where we're helping consumers and auditors ensure the products and processes are as they claimed. It's protecting the product against counterfeit, it's providing evidence of process, so this is all helping deliver this perception of trust. Have this blockchain, you can trust what's going on here. So systems facilitate supply chain visibility, but this end-to-end visibility and digitisation is a challenge. All of our cases highlighted the need for end-to-end supply chain digitisation. It is possible for digital goods, the implementation of rights management in digital art, for instance. Apt and Petrovsky propose that supply chains for physical goods cannot be fully digital, which poses us a significant challenge. The opportunity for fraud is at points where data is manually inputted or where labels can be changed. This is the area where we have problems. Now, Kashestri proposes that blockchain removes the requirement for tagging. Now, we can see that might be the case in some foodstuffs where you can take DNA, at the point the food's come out of the ground, and then pick it up again at the end of the supply chain after it's been processed, and you can see, well, is this cereal still in this cereal box? But in our examples we found a total reliance on tagging. So the system's main weakness is at this digital physical boundary. So what are the next steps? So future work, we need further detailed real case applications that includes critical analysis by the firms. That was one of the things I really liked about these cases. The firms were very aware of the weaknesses in their supply chains. And we need longitudinal studies including reasons for and barriers to adoption of the blockchain technologies. What are the contexts? Can we get more context maybe outside food? What are the institutions? What firms are doing it? Who are the actors? The individuals? What are their strengths, weaknesses, etc.? We need some transdisciplinary studies looking at this from the computer science, from the institutional, from the international business perspectives to really understand what's going on. Studies beyond fintech maybe that address the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So here's some questions to consider in a product or service and its supply. So what is the ideal set of data that would help inform action? What's the timeliness of that data? What level of detail? Where do you need that data to collect? What are the steps in your supply chain? So do you really understand every processing, every movement step? And then what could you measure? Where might you not be able to measure? Where might you not be able to see into your supply chain? And how could you capture that data? Can you collect it automatically using digital means? Are you going to have these physical digital interfaces? Are you going to have to tag things? And what sort of tagging might you use? Is there a trusted third party who can hold data, or do you need a blockchain? If you do need a blockchain, what data are you going to record into that blockchain? What data don't you need to put on the blockchain? And then which blockchain will you use? Who will be part of the consensus forming of the blockchain? And who's going to mine these blocks for you? These are all things to consider. So hopefully you can see there's some potential benefits in blockchain. There's also some drawbacks, and all of these ideas are captured in the paper done with Michael Rogerson and myself, Glenn Parry, Blockchain Case Studies in Supply Chain Visibility, published in Supply Chain Management and International Journal.